Welcome to this edition of Real World Employment Law, where we discuss real-world issues impacting businesses and executives. I'm Declan Leonard. I'm managing partner here at Behrensweig Leonard, and I also head up the firm's employment law practice.
And I'm Amber Orr. I'm a senior associate attorney at the law firm.
Amber, great to be here with you doing this podcast.
Happy to be here.
I think this is our first one that we've done together, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so Amber is, you've been with us for about 4 years, a little bit over 4 years now, right?
Mm-hmm. Since 2017.
And I know you're modest, but Amber is a real rock star here at the firm. She's a great part of our team, and she frankly makes me look good with a lot of our clients, so I appreciate that. And she loves Texas. As you can tell, she went to University of Texas. She's got her Texas orange on.
Yes, through thick and thin, mostly thick.
Yes. I made the mistake when I first met you thinking that you were a Dallas Cowboys fan. I forget about the Houston Texans, you know?
No, Texans most of the time, but definitely not Dallas. I'm sorry.
Who knew there was such a rivalry between Houston and Dallas? I never knew that.
Oh, yeah, everything.
Well, listen, we are going to be talking about unions. And at first, when I thought about this, I was like, unions? Why? Why? I mean, this ain't the 1980s. I may dress like it sometimes, but this is not the 1980s. I mean, why, Amber, are we talking about unions?
They're definitely on the rise. You see people talking about it on social media, especially with Apple, Starbucks, hitting the news about their elections and the results. It's a big talking point right now.
So you mentioned, so it's Amazon and Starbucks. They're kind of the businesses that, in today's day, I can kind of see why they have, why there's union activity, let's put it that way, because, you got warehouses and retail. But is what you're seeing, are you seeing it limited to those type companies, or are they broader?
It's definitely broader. We're seeing in the tech industry, government contractors, doctors, university professors. And, on first glance, you think, wait, aren't these people highly compensated? Don't they have the mobility to move around, change jobs quickly? Why do they need someone else representing them?
Yeah, it is really eye-opening. You and I have actually handled a number of these recently, and a lot of them have been in the government contracting context, which if you would have told me, 5 years ago that government contractors were going to be subject to, targeted by the unions for entry into those workplaces, I would have been very surprised because, like you just said, I mean, generally the terms and conditions are sort of dictated by the federal contract and things of that nature, but they are making some inroads there. So how does this even happen, like where a union enters into like a workplace?
I mean, we're definitely seeing a big push from the Biden administration as well. And actually, recently, the administration has released a report encouraging more union, activity and representation, and directed towards government contractors as well. You
said the Biden administration is really making a big push for increased union in companies. Does that come from the White House, or is there an agency that deals with this? Yeah,
it's the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB, as we call them commonly.
Okay, and what's their role in this whole process?
The NLRB is there to help facilitate the union process and getting it certified or not certified, depending on how the employees vote.
Okay, and you and I have had personal experience with this in terms of it's actually an election, right? I mean, describe sort of the process. We've been on these interesting, it was Zoom because it was over the COVID time period, but what was it like?
Yeah, these last 2 years, things have been a little bit different because of COVID. The elections have been happening over Zoom rather than in person. The employees are mailing in their ballots. But so pretty much taking 2 steps back, employees, they all receive a ballot where they can say, yes, I support the union, or no, I'm not interested. And thereafter, the NLRB hosts an election over Zoom or in person as well, where they count the votes. It's all anonymous and secret. You don't know who voted for what in either way. And then based on if there's a majority for the union gets certified. And if not, it does not.
Okay, and you said secret. In fact, a lot of this whole process is pretty secret because isn't it true that what happens is a company, the company executives or whatever, they may not even know that there's something afoot, that the unions are actually, that there's some union organizing going on until it's gotten a little bit more organized, right?
Yeah, sometimes they don't know until they receive a notice from the NLRB saying, hey, we're going to set up an election.
Yeah.
They're completely taken off guard and just don't know exactly what's happening in the workplace.
Yeah, and then these elections, they're kind of, we're so used to political elections, but like there is campaigning that goes on, isn't there?
Yes, there's a lot of campaigning on both sides, on the union side, and then also on the employer side as well.
Employer as of right now is allowed to actually call meetings during a workday, as long as they're paying their employees, call meetings. They call it like the captive audience rule, where they can call meetings and explain their side of why they don't want a union to be in there. Apparently that's under attack, I read.
Yeah, so the general counsel for the NLRB, who was appointed by Biden, is looking to end that ability for employers to gather their employees and talk about their viewpoint when it comes to the union.
And that would be seismic, because that captive audience rule has been in place for, I think it's 75 years. So that would be, and there's a lot of other things that the National Labor Relations Board General Counsel's office is looking to do. And what they're looking to do is they're looking to make the process easier for a union to come into a company. Isn't that right?
Yes, and one way to make it easier for a union to come into place is to get rid of the election that we just spoke about. Instead of having an election just going off of certification that the employees sign.
Okay.
If there's a majority of employees that sign this one sheet, then there's a union.
So short circuit the whole process, make it easier for a union to actually get in there. Okay, so let's just assume, if the election doesn't go the way of the union, then we know the union's not in there. But what's the practical implications? Why do companies get so concerned and worked up about having a union in the workplace? What are some of the practical implications that we have seen?
Yeah, there's no more direct line to the employees. Instead, you have to go through the union, and you also have to negotiate with the union to put in place a collective bargaining agreement, which is a contract between the union and the employer that establishes certain terms and conditions for all employees within that bargaining union.
So we throw around the term a lot in employment law. You and I are employment law geeks. We throw around the term, at least I'm a geek. We throw around the term at-will employment. So in a non-union environment, it goes both ways. A company can terminate somebody, but then that employee can also leave, go down the street to a better job. So it's a very free flow under the at-will employment doctrine.
Yeah.
How is that implicated when we're talking about unions?
Well, within the collective bargaining agreement, the employer and the union will discuss discipline and what steps must be taken before an employee can be terminated. And so companies don't have that right just to go ahead and terminate. They have to go through the process, talk to the union about it to reach that decision.
Yeah, terms that we focus on are like progressive discipline, making sure that, you give a verbal, then a written warning, and then maybe you put them on a performance improvement plan, a PIP. All those things that sometimes when you're not involved, when a union's not involved, you kind of go straight to the end game if you think that that's the business decision that you're going to make, that you need to terminate an employee.
Yeah.
Unions kind of change that dynamic. As you said, it's no longer a direct one-on-one. It's kind of like, okay, we've got to go through this collective bargaining agreement and make sure we adhere to it. And then what happens, does the employee, like in a non-union environment, employees sometimes have some wrongful termination rights.
Yeah.
Certainly discrimination and harassment. Those are very potent rights that we have in Virginia on the federal side. But if it's just a more run-of-the-mill, you use the wrong process to terminate me, and it's a non-union, an employee really doesn't have much recourse. But how about in the union context? What can they do? Can they file something?
Yeah, they can file an action with the National Relations Board or go to arbitration if the collective bargaining agreement provides that. And you have to go through the arbitration process, which can take time to determine whether or not the company violated the collective bargaining agreement or if they were within their rights to terminate.
Yeah, and those, I will just tell you, sort of a real world story. I handled one of these one time for a company where they had to terminate an employee, and very problematic employee. One of the allegations was that he was bringing a knife to work and displaying it. I'm not saying it was necessarily threatening. And so I asked him about it, and we were in an arbitration. I asked him about it, and he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a buck knife and he unfolds it and he puts it on the table, and I'm across from him there, and he said, "You mean this knife?" and obviously trying to intimidate me, and he proceeded to leave it on there for the next 20 minutes. And so I'm thinking, I'm not saying anything because I want the arbitrator to see, you want this guy back in the workplace? And these arbitrators, I don't want to totally generalize, but they tend to be pretty pro-employee friendly. And in that particular case, they ordered his reinstatement. There was all kinds of other stuff this employee was doing. They ordered his reinstatement. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was like...
Yeah, it all goes back to that collective bargaining agreement. You're pretty locked in.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is a different world than just the regular, sort of corporate world. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up. Like, what? I mean, we talked about how companies oftentimes don't even know that this is going on. What can companies do, like in the meantime, maybe now, just to maybe head off having this in their workplace?
One of the big thing is always communication. Communication with your employees and really understanding what's going on in the workplace.
Yeah, making sure that you have a direct line with your employees, making sure that you have policies in place so that there's not questions. Because a lot of times what the union will do is they'll come in and say, you're not getting good enough stuff, or you're not getting, the right benefits or stuff. So, making sure that you have periodic reviews of your employees, and those should not just be like an annual review, right? That's probably not quite enough.
Yeah.
But also just making sure you know what your employees want. Like, I mean, we handle those sometimes with surveys to the companies and things of that nature. And I know you've done those for our clients quite a bit.
Yes, definitely, seeing where your employees are and making sure that you understand what's going on in the workplace.
Yeah, and you got a finger on the pulse. Make sure that you know if there's discontent, or if people want a certain benefit. Make sure you're not learning about it from a union organization effort, as opposed to making sure you have interacted and communicated. As you said, communication is always key. Amber, great discussion.
Yeah.
I never thought in 2022 we'd be talking about unions, and especially in the GovCon context or in the white collar, industries. But that's the reality that's going on right now. We expect it to continue probably for the next couple of years at least. But thanks. Really appreciate you joining me here for this discussion.
Thanks for having me.